Well, I'm going to start by introducing myself. So I know many of you know who I am, but if you're new to the Signet world, I'm Sheila. I'm Signet CEO. I've been doing this for, oh boy, almost 20 years now. And I got my start in test prep. So whenever I get to talk about the SAT or the ACT, I get really excited because this is like the stuff I nerd out on. So today we are going to talk about how to quote unquote hack the test, even if your kid's not a great test taker, even if they have ADHD or some other sort of challenge standing in their way of them really demonstrating what they're capable of on these tests. I'll be the first to tell you I am not always a fan of these tests. I'm really not. And I'm not ever going to try to convince somebody that they need, or their kid needs to take a test when I don't think it's going to be in their best interest. So the SAT and ACT are not for everybody. But for some students, it can be a strong point of their application. And I just don't want you to count that out until you do a little work to figure out what's possible here, right? So that's kind of the tone of our conversation today. I know it's not for everybody. And if you're not sure if it's for your kid, please give us a call. I'm always happy to chat and we'll talk through your specific situation and I'll kind of give you my reasoning and we can weigh the pros and cons and then you can make the best decision for your family. Oh, Jenna, for kids who get extra time, this is really, really important. They need to know how to use that extra time. You know, sometimes just having the breathing room can do a lot for them, but if they can use that time strategically, wow, it really moves the needle. So I'm glad you're here. All right, I'm going to start my screen share. I will keep my chat open. I'll do my best to monitor that as we go along here. But know that I am planning to leave about 15 minutes for questions towards the end here, so we should be able to get to everything. So let me share my screen. Here we go. I got to move my Zoom controls out of the way a little bit. Okay, hacking the hidden obstacles to SAT ACT success. We kind of talked about that already a little bit, but I'll tell you a little bit more about me and why I like nerding out about this. So, way back in the mid 90s, I got a perfect score on my SATs. And I did work very hard to get it. Some of it came natural to me, but I did have to study a lot. It helped that I had a brother who was only a year older than me that I felt very competitive with, and I was like determined to beat his score. So I was very motivated to study. Um, and I'm sharing this not to brag on myself, but really to explain how Signet's a little bit different here. There are lots of test prep tutors that did very well themselves on these tests, but most high performers don't really know how they did it. It just has always been easy for them, or the test made sense when they looked at it. And so in those cases, those tutors are not always the best prepared to teach a student for whom this doesn't come naturally, how to improve their score. But at Signet, we really obsess over the why and the how so that we can share that knowledge and share that insight with you and your child as they prepare to take one of these tests. So it's more about the sort of metacognition of why did this work? Why did this work for this particular type of student who maybe makes this kind of mistake? And we're always sharing our insights and our experiences to really expand our toolbox of best practices. And we've seen all kinds of situations. Most I would say every learning difference under the sun, and helped all kinds of students with all different kinds of goals, whether that's just I need to hit this number for athletic recruiting, I'm looking for a perfect score, I'm looking to move this section up, right? We really like to create a tailored plan for each student depending on their strengths and their areas of improvement, and then of course their specific goals. So we're very intentional about this. And before we dig into kind of how we do this and what some of those tools are that are in our toolbox, I do want to give you just a very quick primer. This is not a webinar on what is the difference between the SAT and the ACT and which one should you take, but I did want to give you at least one slide to kind of ground us, right? So the SAT is now a digital test. It is computer based. It's about 2.5 hours long and it's adaptive. So you get two verbal sections. That's the kind of grammar stuff and the reading comprehension. You get two of those, and you get two math sections. And depending on how you do on the first of each of those sections, you'll either get a harder or easier second module for that topic. And so that's what we mean that's what we mean by adaptive. It tries to home in on, this sort of more precise version of a score for a student by changing the difficulty levels of the questions that they're going to get the second section. Reading comp on the SAT is no longer a big passage that maybe you're familiar with from when you took it. One big passage and then 6 or 7 questions after it. Now it is 54 individual texts. So these are 3 or 4 sentence texts, and each one has a question about it. Some students really love that. Some students absolutely hate that. The test itself is quite reading heavy. So even in the math section, there's a lot of reading to do. And most people would describe the SAT as tricky. It's like a brain teaser. They're little puzzles, right? There are a lot of trap doors you got to watch out for. You do get more time per question, theoretically, so you can navigate that trickiness. And it is scored out of 1,600, 800 for the verbal side and 800 for the math side. Then we have the ACT, which is just as valid a test as the SAT. If you grew up on one of the coasts, you probably were more familiar with the SAT, but these days the ACT is just as common. Every college accepts both without any preference. The ACT now, just as of this last September, you can take it as a paper test or a computer-based test. There is an optional science section, and if you do it with the science section, we're looking at 2 3/4 of an hour. So it's a bit longer than the SAT, and it is not adaptive. It is linear straight through. The later questions don't depend on how you do on the earlier questions. As I said, we have a number of sections here. One is an optional science section. Generally, the content is pretty similar between the SAT and the ACT in terms of, the math that they're testing. And even though the ACT has a science section, the SAT has questions that are sort of like that, integrated throughout the reading section and the math section. These are questions that might involve a graph or a chart. And so it's really kind of a technical reading section. The ACT is known as the more straightforward test. The questions, you read them, you're like, oh, okay, this looks like a math question I would see on, a math test at school. So students find it a little more accessible in that way, but you do have less time per question. So you have to move quite quickly, and your accuracy really matters. Now, they've just redesigned this test, and it's not a wholly different test. It's pretty much the same, but they are giving more time per question than they used to, but it's still less time per question than you get on the SAT. So keep that in mind as you're trying to decide between these two. And then the ACT is scored out of 36. Now, if you have questions about this, please put them in the chat, and we can come back to it. And I have done previous webinars and even a podcast recently on this new ACT and how to decide between the two tests. So that's part of what you need to do to make sure your student is maximizing their score here, is choose the right test. But the thing that I want to focus on today is that these tests are not measuring what students know. It's not about knowledge. It's not about facts even. It's about skill. It's about doing certain things within certain constraints, right? So a lot of students think, oh, I'm not smart enough if they don't get a great score, or they don't even want to touch the test because they feel like they're not, the sharpest student. But I assure you that really has very little to do with how well you score. I mean, it helps to have a good base of knowledge to build from, but the questions are not on advanced topics that juniors and seniors are learning. They're usually around things that they learned in freshman or sophomore year. And it's really about the skill of being accurate, precise, paying attention to detail, and moving quickly enough that gets students to their highest score. All right. And then I'm going to give you an example, and I purposely picked this so that the screen would be really crowded and you would feel really overwhelmed. So this is a sample question from ACT Science. This test was given a couple of years back. And I just want you to kind of experience what a student might be feeling here, right? We've got a lot of scientific jargon. We've got diagrams. We've got a chart with like, abbreviations that we haven't seen before. And I'll tell you, most basic science curriculums in school are not talking about radio frequencies or sound waves, which is what this is all about, right? So already your student is going to feel kind of off their footing because they never studied this in school, and they might feel like, oh God, I need to know this and I don't know this. What do I do? Right? Um, and this is quite typical of an ACT science passage, or like I said, sometimes these types of questions are on the SAT as well. They're really trying to distract the student with words and visuals that they are not familiar with, right? Try your best not to look at that stuff at the top of your screen up here, and let's focus just on the actual question that they have to answer, right? Based on the results of experiment 1, for how many of the diameters tested was the frequency for NP1 less than that for NP2? Now, even the question stem is kind of worded a little strangely, and that might throw you off. But if you really kind of take a breath and say, wait, what are they asking me to do? They're saying, when was NP1's frequency listed here less than NP2's? And if we look, it's there, it's there, it's there, it's there, it's 5. The answer is J, right? So this is, I think, a great example of how like we could overcomplicate this by trying to really deeply understand what they're showing us and read all of these words and spend a lot of time on that. But actually, to answer the question, you just need to know where to look. And then it just opens up, right? And so it's a great example of the skill that is needed, right? Holding aside some distractions, staying focused on what actually needs to be done, and having sort of selective, maybe blinders on so that you can tune out all of that other stuff, stay present, and answer the actual question that's given here, right? It's just not about intelligence. It's not about how much time you put into practice, your willpower, or how hard of a worker you are. Those things could help, right? But that's not really what leads to the highest score. It's about practicing the right things the right way at the right times for the right length of time for the goal that your student has in mind, right? And what we just worked through on that last slide is something that we can teach students, right? Once we show them, hey, all this stuff here is to scare you. Let's actually work on the skill of focusing out certain things and focusing in on certain other things. And how do you know what to focus on and when? Those are the things that we want to practice, not go and study sound waves. And I think it's really important to know this. Both kids who are quote unquote bad or quote unquote good at testing need to understand this, right? We work with a lot of students who are, somewhere in the high 1400s on the SAT, and they want to break 1500. This is something that is going to help them break through. But students who just like cower in the face of a test, feel like they can't do it, this is really empowering for them to know as well, because it's not about their intelligence. And I'm sure they're very bright. These tests are not measuring intelligence, though, right? So hopefully that gives them a little confidence. Now, here's another thing I want to show you. Now, I'm not a baseball player, but go with me. We're going to do a little baseball metaphor. We've got a pitcher up here, and we've got our batter down here. And this pitcher is about to throw a pitch, right? And of course, we know baseball players practice batting. They build muscle so they can swing that bat as hard as possible, right? They work on their form and all of that. But what the best ball players do is something more than that, is something a little different than that. So let's say this is the path that this pitch is going to take. I know it's a little weird, but go with me. Now, most people, the experienced player knows even before the ball takes that course, by how the pitcher is holding the ball, by the weight, in their body, the way that they're positioning themselves, maybe by what they're looking at, behind the batter. They know what to expect before the pitch even leaves the glove. But the rest of us, we don't know what it's going to do until it's right in front of us. And it's probably too late to take our best swing at it. Right now, this is very similar to what we're trying to show students on an SAT or an ACT. We want them to be the experienced player. We want them to say, oh, when I look at one of these science sets that's throwing all this jargon at me, and then there's a chart and whatever, oh, I know what they're doing. I've seen this before. I'm going to go straight to that question and really focus in on what I need to know, right? They're going to skip all the drama and they're going to know what's expected of them, right? And they're also going to be aware of what's going to be thrown at them that's going to try to distract them from what they need to do, right? And if they don't have that sort of familiarity and knowledge and self monitoring, they are going to be presented with a surprise every single question. And they're going to go through all of that emotional energy, all of the mental energy, and then the work of trying to actually solve the problem. And they're going to lose time, they're going to lose confidence, and we're going to start going downhill and things are going to spiral, right? So we want them to be this experienced player. And the way we talk about doing that is building a sense of automaticity, right? This should be automatic. They're going to be so experienced seeing these questions that they don't even going to have to think about it. They're not going to have to analyze all this stuff to be like, oh, this is what's going to happen. They're just going to know in their bones, right? It's like muscle memory. And what scientists call this is a mental model, right? We're going to build a mental model of that kind of problem and this kind of problem and this kind of situation. So we can sidestep our short-term memory and all of this sort of environmental stuff that's going on and focus on the high level details that are actually important here. Manage our time, reduce that strain and stress, and maintain our confidence. All right, so this is really what we're after. And yes, this is a great skill to have for the SAT or the ACT, but it's also a great skill to have in life, right? This is how we all get good at our jobs. This is how we become better parents. We are like, oh, I remember when my older kid did this and I remember what worked. I can do that again, right? So we're always doing this as humans. This is how we learn and this is how we master things. And this is a great opportunity to build this skill in your teenager. And we call this at Signet performance prep. And I like to say it makes all the difference, right? If these are 3 different phases of test prep, we're going to start with content, right? We really want to make sure that your student knows all the math they need to know. They know all the grammar rules. They understand how to approach this or that type of problem, drawing on their knowledge, right? That's the content phase, and that is where we start. And we assess what content needs to be worked on through some diagnostic work, usually a practice test. And then we build upon that content with some strategy, right? Here's how I want you to approach the reading section, or we're going to skip this kind of question in math because it always freaks you out and you lose a bunch of time. You can still get the score you want by avoiding trigonometry, whatever it might be, right? So there's strategy. There's also whole test strategy, right? Like using the process of elimination or annotating their test paper really well, or using some of the tools that are built into the digital testing software. But performance, as you can see on my pie chart, is a huge part of this, right? It's like half the battle here because they could know everything and know the strategy and still freeze on test day, right? And still not be able to show what they really do know how to do. So we want to focus a lot on performance. And this analysis helps us know what aspects of that performance to work on. It could be, endurance or focus, but it's also those individual mental models that make up the whole knowledge of the test. And so most test prep places are going to give you content and strategy. And some of them that I know will also do performance, right? But at Signet, you get this whole ecosystem of our executive function coaching, and most of our tutors are also executive function coaches. So if your kid has ADHD, for example, we also know how to use the tools that are going to help them with their ADHD and apply them to the specific context of the SAT or the ACT. Everything we do is built on a relationship. So first and foremost, we're all mentors over here. We love doing what we do because we love being role models for students, helping them through their challenges, and just meeting them as full humans, right? One of our core values is teach students, not subjects, right? We want to remember these are whole people with complex lives. And we're helping them with some very small piece of it, but it's a huge privilege for us. And we don't want to pretend that other things in their lives are not affecting their academic performance, right? So we want to keep that in mind. And then finally, we have a huge admissions arm, right? It's more than half of our business. And the only reason you're taking the SAT or the ACT is to enable some sort of college result, right? So we don't like to divorce the two of those things because that wouldn't make any sense, right? Your test prep goals should be in conversation with your admissions goals, right? And so we are able to kind of take in this whole picture and help your students stay motivated because maybe they hate the SAT, but they really like this particular college. And so we can help them kind of push through the hard times to be like, okay, we're so close to this target score. This is going to open doors for you, and keep them motivated in that sense, right? And what it does, I like to mention this for parents, right? You don't have to go between all of these different people, their executive function coach, their test prep tutor, their admissions counselor, their high school counselor. It's all here, right? And we're a very collaborative team. There's a lot of conversation happening behind the scenes. We work together very, very closely. So it's not you or your student that has to be the messenger between all of these things, right? So that's just going to take something off of your plate, and make sure you're really focused on what you need to be focused on as a parent. All right, let's get into the how, right? The specifics. I told you the what, right? But we're going to do a little bit of how. So this is a process. It's a repeatable process, right? One of the things I think that is really important to do with students is address their limiting beliefs, which means understand what their fears are, what their expectations are, what they're dreading about the SAT or the ACT, and help them keep it in perspective, right? We're never going to tell them they're wrong or it's all in your head, but we are also going to help them do experiments and look at data that helps dislodge some of those limiting beliefs and helps transfer a little bit more confidence from the tutor into the student, right? Um, and one of those things is sort of like showing you that science problem that we did, right? Showing just how easy that problem actually was if they can ignore all this other stuff. A lot of students would look at that and be like, I'll never be able to do this, right? But just sort of revealing how the test works is a great way to do some of that. And then we also want to be really tied to reality here. So we want to measure and analyze their performance. So I mentioned we do diagnostic testing. We do a lot of homework in between sessions. And what we're trying to do with that homework, of course, is give the student an opportunity to practice, but we're also looking at timing. We're also looking at what kind of questions did they do well on or did they struggle with? And is there a pattern here? Why are they getting certain things wrong? Is there some sort of behavioral mistake that they keep making? Right. And once we can really understand what's going wrong, then we can start helping them see how to make it right. Right. So we're going to coach them towards some solutions. It's always very collaborative. There are cases where I'm like, this is what I want you to do. But a lot of the time, I ask them, well, how do you like to prepare for a test in your science class, right? What are you looking at? And how can I meet you there, so that you're not learning something totally new from scratch, but how can I meet you where your instincts are or your habits already are and just nudge them in a direction so that you're better able to handle what comes at you in these tests. And then a big part of this is the deliberate practice, which I'll break down for you in a moment. We're going to practice, we're going to reflect on that practice, we're going to design the practice so that we're really working on the skills that they need to work on. And then we repeat it, right? We take the results of that practice, we investigate, well, what's going on here. You just like terrified of triangles and you just freak out whenever you see them. Is that a limiting belief of yours? Because let's review some triangle formulas and help you feel more confident. But we also want to see what are the patterns that are showing up. What is that pointing us towards? What's the solution to that? And let's practice building that skill. And we do it over and over again. All right. This is how I like to measure, and analyze, right? This is a very simple spreadsheet. If you email me, I promise I'll send you a blank copy. I call it the advanced error log. And it's grown over my many years of doing this. I have to put it on 2 screenshots for you to see it. But basically, it's a way for students to track their practice, right? Here's the test I did. And then they are listing any question that they got wrong or that they had to guess on, what section it was from, the date that they did it in. And then I want them to name what was that thing testing. That's actually a big part of them building a mental model, is getting them to name it, not me telling them this was testing this thing. Of course, if they're struggling, I'll help them. But once they've done this a few times, they kind of get it. And they're just going to put an X in the column that represents why they got it wrong. Right. And these are sort of the most common things that I've seen. But sometimes I have students add a column for something else that may just not be part of this. Right. And you'll see there was, I'll go back, content stuff, careless mistakes, which is really, really common. It even goes all the way to here. There are lots of different kinds of careless mistakes, a lack of strategy, and then what we call test anxiety. Now, this isn't anxiety with a capital A. It's not a clinical diagnosis, but it's the stuff that stops students from, actually choosing the right answer when they know it, right? This is trainable, mostly avoidable, but we just want to know when it's happening and when what's triggering it, so that we can help a student build kind of a solution around it, right? And once you kind of have that analysis, it's very easy to see the patterns. And I might do that the first time with my student and actually go through every question. We'll put an X and a column together. We'll talk about it. But then every time I assign them practice, I want them to not only grade their practice, but then error log their practice. And because they have to do that, they become very aware of the mistakes that they are making over and over again. They also have a list of topics that they might need to study or refresh. But more importantly, they're building this very insightful knowledge into their own tendencies so that they can take action on those mistakes and hopefully not make them again, right? In order to strengthen that habit, I like to assign deliberate practice, right? So this is practice with a specific goal, where a student is treating it like the real thing. They have to be fully focused, right? No TV on in the background, phone has to be put away. It should include that detailed analysis and some feedback. It should not be too easy, and it should not be so hard that they can't get everything right, right? So it's got to be kind of scaled to where they are so that we can gradually move it up. And it needs to incorporate ways to maintain motivation, right? And that's really the role of a tutor, is to help students see how much progress they are making, help them navigate really difficult challenges, and just be a partner in this. They're not in it alone, to help them keep going. And then, of course, our weekly sessions add a lot to the accountability there. And most importantly, all of this deliberate practice should result in a good mental model, right? If we're struggling with triangle questions, our goal might be to really master these triangle area formula, let's say. And then we do, I don't know, I'm making this up, 30 questions on this thing. And then they have to analyze their performance. And then they are building that model as they go. They're learning how those questions are asked. They are learning where to begin with those questions. They are learning what mistakes they typically make on those questions and how to avoid them, right? And at the end, we have a lot of confidence in our approach to triangle problems, and they're going to see it from a mile away when it's there, right? They're not going to freak out in the moment when it shows up on their page. Now, this is a very condensed version of something that I learned from reading this book called Peak by Anders Ericsson. So if you are interested in this, I highly recommend that book. It's about people who memorize, long digits of pi and things like that. But there are some very actionable takeaways that I do recommend it. Okay. I just given you a lot of information, and I want to go back to something I said at the beginning. The SAT and ACT are not for everybody. Not every student should take this test, right? But before you decide that, I really recommend that you get some information. A couple of different types of information. One is testing policies at the schools that you are really serious about. And if your student is just starting the test prep journey, maybe they don't have a college list yet, but maybe you're starting to throw around some names. You can look up, what is their standardized testing policy? What will it be for the year your student is applying? They usually announce this policy will last until, this season or whatever. So you understand what's actually even required of you, right? What are your options? And then you could also get data from those colleges around the distribution of test scores, right? They usually publish their 25th percentile test score and their 75th percentile test score for admitted students. So you can kind of see, all right, this is the range we would need to target if this is a school that we want to apply to. And then you can compare that to where your student is starting, which is the third type of data here. What are their instincts on these tests? If they do a PSAT or a PACT or just a practice test of each from the test maker's website, what's their starting score, right? And look at it section by section as well, not just the overall score, but how far is that off from, the target colleges that you might be looking at? And that can help you decide, okay, is it going to be worth like all the investment you might need to make of time and energy and money to get from where they are to where they need to be? Right. But you might also say, oh, wow, they're really close already here. Like, this is great. If we can push the score up a little bit, then, we feel confident that this is going to be a strength in their application and the college will see that they are a good fit. So that's where your admission strategy comes in. And this might be something you want to talk to someone else about. Of course, me and my team are here to talk to you. We always do a free consultation with clients, and we can help you think through this. And really, every reputable test prep company will do this analysis for free. You should not be paying for this service because those tests are freely available, right? And they'll rope you into a conversation. Some of them will give you a harder sell than others, but you do want to get some input from somebody who really knows what they're talking about, both on the testing side and the admission side, because remember, that intersection is what we really care about. I just said this part. I didn't click ahead to make my animation work. Okay, so I want to tell you, just leave you here with one story of a student that I worked with 2 years ago who is now at BU, which was her top choice. Her parents were like, this is not going to happen. We're not going to do testing. And I was like, you know what, let's just see. They did a PSAT in October of her 10th grade year. She got an 1150. She didn't even finish half the test, right? She got everything correct and then ran out of time for half the other questions. So this is not a bad score, but it's not a great score either. And, this is a really strong student academically. She's got, A's and A minuses. And they felt this was really not representative of what she could do. And as I worked with her a little bit to understand what was going on here, we saw a couple of things. One, she had an undiagnosed learning disability. And I encouraged her family to go get neuropsych testing, and she got accommodations in place in school, which just took her stress level down a ton. And then we did another practice test with extra time, and she did so well. Just that changed her feelings about the test and gave her a lot of confidence. But then we started test prep with her. And I'm so pleased to report, of course, this is kind of a Cinderella story. April 11th grade, she got a perfect score on her first and only sitting of the ACT. Now, this is a really dramatic change, but we've seen it happen more than once. And sometimes it's about choosing the right test, right? This was a PSAT, and then we switched her to the ACT. Sometimes it's about getting the right accommodations in place, but you also have to know what to do with those accommodations, how to manage your own stress, how to understand your own strengths and weaknesses. And, this test was not required. BU is still test optional, but it just boosted her confidence so much to early decision there. And that's where she ended up and is so thrilled to be there. All right, I'm going to stop talking for a second. I'm going to pull my chat hopefully back up on the screen somewhere, wherever it might be. And we'll go to your questions. And I really do want to give you the opportunity to talk about anything really that you are curious about. So I'm going to give a minute here. Oh, we've got one question in the chat already. I'm going to give you a minute to put a couple more questions in the chat. And then we'll start going through these. Let me take a sip of water and then I'll start answering. Hold on. I apologize. Also, my phone is on the other side of the room, so I'm not watching the time. I probably should watch the time. Okay, 3:06. We got plenty of time. Oh, this is great. Okay. Jenna asks, is it ever recommended for a student to take both the SAT and ACT to gauge which test your child is better at? And then can you just submit the score of one, or do you have to submit all scores? This is a great question. I actually do recommend that you take both to gauge which tests they're better at, but don't take an official test to do that, because in some cases you're never going to have to submit both ACT and SAT, but in some cases you'll have to submit all of your SAT scores or all of your ACT scores, and you may not want to show all of those scores if the first one was really a test you did blind. So I mentioned very quickly that the SAT and the ACT have free practice tests on their website. These are tests that have been officially given and now are retired, and so they use them as their free practice on their websites. I highly recommend going to those and using those as your gauge, right? And we do this for free. We'll set you up with official practice tests, and then we'll do some analysis and we'll talk you through what we're seeing. So do that instead of taking the official one. But the second half of your question there, can you submit the score you want? Yeah, you can choose between the SAT and the ACT. Like I said, a college doesn't care. But there are some options to suppress certain scores, right? So most colleges will super score the SAT. I want to say most super score the ACT, but it is a lower number than super score the SAT. So super score means, like, let's say you take the test 3 times and you did really well on the math section the first time and then the verbal section the second time, and then you did really poorly on both of them on the third time. They'll just take your highest section scores and put them together as your super score. Right? And the ACT does that as well, but it really depends on the specific testing policy of each school. And unfortunately, they don't use kind of standardized language. It does take a little bit of decoding to figure out what they're telling you. So it's best to save your official test administrations for when your student is truly ready and has prepared for a test. But there's plenty of practice material out there that you can work on and build that understanding of which test is going to be better. Okay. Claire asks, if the university is test optional, does a student still need to submit? No, actually, it's that simple. It's optional. Your application is considered complete with or without test scores. On the actual application, students will say, yes, please consider my test scores, or no, please do not consider my test scores. And they don't have to submit any scores if they choose the no, right? But it is worth looking at some data to see how far they might be off from the, let's say desired test score at a certain school, to see whether it's worth submitting a score. Colleges also release data about how many of their students submitted an SAT or ACT score. So you can really see like what the competition is. A lot of parents ask me, like, is test optional really test optional? It really is. But if you want to know what maybe the preference is, even if the stated policy is optional, looking at how many of the enrolled students actually did submit can tell you that, right? Because there are some schools that only 30% of students submit a test score, and the rest of them got in without a test score. But then there are other schools where 80 or 90% actually submitted a test score. And so your student's going to be better off if they can submit a test score in those situations. I hope that clarifies, Claire. Let me know if it doesn't. Leela asks a really good question. When I say close, like, is a student close to their target score? What do I mean by close? I would say on the SAT, if they're within 150 to 200 points of their goal score, that's close. That's worth trying to move it up above. On the ACT, I think that's more like 3 or 4 points from their goal score. Remember, they're on different scales. But of course, it's always more nuanced than that, because if I look at an ACT report, for example, and a student has done really poorly on the English section and maybe middling in math, but has really strong reading and science scores, I actually usually recommend that we go for it because the skills that are necessary to do well on reading and science actually are a really great signal that they can bring up the English and math scores quite a bit. So even if it's more than a 4 point difference between where they are and what they want to be at, if I see that kind of mix or inconsistency in the section scores, that tells me a lot about what's possible here, right? And then, of course, we have to balance that with how much time does the student have in a week, right? Are they one of these totally overscheduled students that does not have room for this in their schedule? Or is the fall like a really busy season for them because of sports or the musical or whatever it might be? So you kind of have to also think about, well, when would be the ideal time to test? And how much time is there between now and then? And is that gap achievable to close within that time? Right. I really do believe that every student can improve their score, but for some students, it's just going to take so long or cause so much stress that it ends up not being worth the investment. Right. So we're kind of trying to map out, what does the year look like? What does their schedule look like? How is this going to impact their stress levels? Is this going to distract from their ability to do well in school? Because grades do matter more than test scores. So we don't want to see a kid getting B's and C's in order to get a really high test score. Like they don't, it's not a one-to-one kind of one can make up for the other. The grades matter a lot more than the test score. So it's definitely something that deserves a individualized conversation. But I gave you my general ranges there. Okay, Saba asks, when is the best time to start? I usually say we want to do this diagnostic process the summer after sophomore year. But I would say maybe half of my clients do this in the fall of junior year, sometime between, September and December of junior year. They're figuring out, what is our testing plan? Are we going to plan? When are we going to test? What do we need to do? And then they prep and practice for a test that is later in the spring. I like to get it done earlier. Like I said, start the diagnostic process in 10th grade, at the end of 10th grade, because they might be able to use that summer to prep and get the test out of the way before school even begins in junior year, when we know there's more extracurricular commitments, there's harder classes, right? Like this is a big thing, and so if we can get it to not interfere with school, that would be great. So I like doing that diagnostic process at the end of sophomore year. It doesn't mean you have to test right away, but at least we have a plan in place for the year ahead. And it's not too late. I don't know if I have any parents of seniors on the call. You can still test until December. So there is still time to prep if you find out you need a score or you realize this might be a thing that we could do better at. But I don't, again, want to take away focus from school, or if they're a senior, from writing their applications, which is a whole other thing that takes up a lot of time. Ooh, I got some good questions here. Okay. When you work with a child to study for one of these tests, what is the time commitment typically? And how do you match students with an optimal tutor for them? Well, Jenna, I'm so glad you asked. That's a great question. So, our standard is about an hour and a half a week with a tutor in a live session. And some students prefer to do that all at once, an hour and a half a week. And some students like to do two 45-minute sessions in a week, just because maybe their schedule doesn't allow for it, or maybe the attention is just a little hard to maintain past 45 minutes. So we don't want to be wasting time or giving them information that's just kind of going in one ear and out the other. So we like the shorter, sort of more frequent sessions. And then there's homework on top of that, right? So, you aren't in a session with a tutor, but tutors usually assign an hour to 2 hours of homework a week. And I particularly like to give my students a full practice test every 4 weeks. And most of our students are prepping for 3 to 4 months. So in the course of that time, they'll do an initial diagnostic and then 3 or 4 full practice tests, maybe an extra one right before the real test, to make sure that they're having the opportunity to kind of pull everything together. And the second half of your question is a really great one. We spend a lot of time at Signet thinking about the match, right? So you'll see on your screen, you can sign up for a free consultation. We'll talk you through all of this stuff. But one of the things that we're also doing that consultation is learning a lot about your student, right? How hard do they have to work for their grades? What are their favorite teachers like? Where are the areas of struggle? Where do you as a parent have to remind them to get things done, or do you ever have to, right? What does their schedule look like? And so we're matching along all of these different kind of aspects, right? Personality, I think, matters a lot, but also, is this particular tutor really good at teaching students how to use the Desmos calendar or calculator on the SAT? And we know that's something that the student really needs, right? And then, of course, we also want to match on availability. So we've got tutors all over the country. We can handle a lot of different kinds of time zones. We got lots of international clients as well. But we also want to make sure that when your student is available to meet is the time that that tutor is also available to meet, because otherwise we're just going to be stuck in these like logistics that just feel like they never get resolved, right? So we do want to make this easy for you as a family, but also just fit seamlessly right into the student's schedule. So we'll also match in terms of availability. And then if there are other things that you know about your student that you think would be really helpful, like they get really shy around people who are smiley and talkative. Like me. I've been matched with students sometimes that I'm like, oh wow, I think I scare them. And so we need to switch the tutor. And that's one of the benefits of working with a company as opposed to just an individual tutor, is you've got a whole team of people, right? And we're sharing information all the time. So that means if I am going on vacation and I know your student really needs to work on the grammar stuff, I'm going to tap in one of my great tutors who works on grammar to sub in for me while I'm out. And then you don't have to go around and like figure this all out, right? Like it's very, very seamless. I got a little off track from your question there, but that was a good one. Thank you. Okay. We still have about 10 more minutes. Who else has a question? And feel free to come off mute if it's easier than putting it in the chat.
Hey Sheila, I had a question. It's okay.
Sure. Hi, Rupita.
Hey, um, so you know my son, and he's
Yeah.
a Signet student,
Yeah.
and he's planning on doing ACT.
Hmm.
He just recently got his PSAT scores,
Okay.
which I know is not like the best indicator of how he will do on ACT, but it's way lower than what he was expecting. I think it's
Mm,
1280.
okay.
Um, I've asked him. I think right now he's tutoring with Jenny.
Hmm. Oh no, Preeti, I think we lost you.
And I've asked him to share the specifics and breakdown with Jenny. So we'll touch base with him. You hear me, Sheila?
Did we just lose your video? Are you still there?
I'm there. I turned off my video so you could hear me
Yes,
properly.
we can.
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you much
Sorry,
better.
I'll try to be short,
No, that's
and
okay.
maybe I'll follow up via email.
Sure. Yeah, of course.
Um, I mean, and it's probably because he's not sharing all the information with me, and that's
Mm,
already on track. But a couple things stood out to me from today's session, which I have attended these, and I've still learned a lot
yeah.
today. One was you should do super scoring on ACT. And then the other one, you said at least 3 to 4 practice tests before the actual test. And I know he's planning on going in December.
Hmm.
So what I'm wondering is, my question is he ready? Especially if not all schools do 3 to 4, sorry, not all schools do super scoring on ACT. Like,
Hmm.
how do I know if he's ready? And I know I can email Jenny and I'll probably do that too. But since I had your attention, I kind of wanted to get your feel on that really quick.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking the question. I don't have his most recent practice results at my fingertips, but I can also touch base with Jenny about this. But I like to do 3 or 4 practice tests. Not every tutor is going to agree that that's the best course of action for every student, right? So we can certainly touch base with Jenny to see if that would be helpful. But
Hmm.
sometimes it's actually something I said in the marketing materials leading up to this webinar, but not something I said in the webinar, so it's worth repeating. sometimes you don't want to put in like the reps for practice until you know the student has the technique right. Otherwise, we're
Yeah,
building bad habits, right? And I'm not
right.
saying that's what's going on with your son. I don't honestly don't know. I'll have to check with Jenny what's going on. But that would be a reason why we would say, well, let's not do a practice test yet. And sometimes the reason is we don't think they're uh, one is that maybe the technique is not quite right yet, or we think that a practice test too soon might be disheartening,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we really want to time them right. But I'm just guessing here because I don't know the specifics right now, but I'll find out for you and I'll make sure to follow up.
Thank you. No, all of that makes sense. I think my bigger question still remains, which clearly Jenny is the one that
Absolutely.
would be need to be looped in to answer the question. Is he
Yeah.
ready for December? Like
Yeah.
that, I think
Well,
question
we
is
still
still
have
there.
about 6 weeks. So
Right.
a lot can happen in 6 weeks.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. I'm
Thanks for
so
the
glad
question.
he's in good hands.
Good, thank you. Oh,
Thanks.
Janet has a great question here. When you take the SAT, do you have to designate schools to receive the score? Can you wait to decide? I didn't answer that already, Janet, so that's a good one. You do not have to. You have the option to. With your registration fee, they'll send, I think it's up to 4 free score reports. But if you don't know where you're applying yet, or you're not sure this is your best score, I would say don't send anything yet. When it comes time to file your applications, you'll send official scores, and those scores will cost you a little bit, but I think it's like $15 per report. So it's not a huge fee, but it's better to sort of wait and make sure you're sending the right score to the right places. Okay. Well, we've got about 8 more minutes left. Does anyone else have any other questions? This is like your opportunity to ask me anything you want. So feel free. It doesn't have to be related to test prep. Okay, nobody else has any questions, then I will give you the gift of time. And please feel free to email me or sign up for a free consultation. Andrea and Mackenzie are really knowledgeable and they can help you through every situation. And of course, if it calls for like some real expertise, then they can call me in too. But please don't be shy. All right, everybody. Thank you for your time. Have a good night.